I'm here to introduce Elizabeth Mattis Namgyal, who's one of my senior students and dear to me. Her new book, Logic of Faith. I think this book, I find it to be a very, very inspiring and really very progressive book in the case of combining the reasoning and the faith, and how the reasoning has to, in the end, turn into a faith, and the faith has to also support the reasoning, and they're not really as believed as separate, but they're actually very much in support of one another. And also I find this book to be really a great sort of like a next step from her first book,
Power of an Open Question.
Power of Open Questioning. So I'm very happy that she has been able to write both of these books, and that this book is going to be coming out, and I hope that this will be really a great benefit to many, and many who reads. I hope that it really serves them to sort of bring the two together, which sort of like in the West is seen as sometimes as an opposite to one another. So, Elizabeth, this logic of faith. What is the logic part, and what is the faith part, and how do you sort of like come from the reasoning to the logic?
Yeah. Well, I think I've always been very intrigued by the notion of faith, and I've noticed a big division between faith as an experience for myself that is something that I felt since I was very young, feeling of which I interpreted as faith, or I named it as faith, but it was just a feeling of connectedness and also a sense of confidence, but not a confidence that was conditioned or based on ideas or dogmas. So I don't know if I had thought that all out when I was very young, but I had these bigger experiences, and I always valued those, and because I valued those, I always was in pursuit of those kind of experiences or understanding what that was. And then, as we grow older, we start to learn, pick up things in our culture, and perhaps get involved in some kind of organized religion or spiritual practice. And then I encountered, I guess, what I might call some kinds of dogmas or shoulds and shouldn'ts, and form kind of more concrete ideas about what's true and what's not true. And I found that in those ways I started to lose my sense of wonder. And that bothered me so much. So experience and what I was learning through my own conceptual mind, they didn't come together in a way that I felt comfortable. So this book was a way for me to explore for myself. It was a very personal inquiry into what that was about, and looking at the culture and our assumptions about words, and especially the word faith, which is often associated with dogma, to the point where it often seems like faith is kind of a bad word. That bothers me very much, because from an experiential view, like I said, I feel faith is something extremely important. And then, looking at the human condition in the context of faith, I find that, how can you not faith? Because faith itself implies we don't know. The world around us is continuously changing and not singular in any way, and interdependent. So everything is always moving and changing. So it's impossible to know anything in a determinate way. So you really have to have faith. On the other hand, faith doesn't mean stress or anxiety. It's a way of being able to find some kind of confidence and relaxation in the fact that we can't hold on, in the human condition, the way that it is, which is very profound. And, it kind of harkened back to my experiences of feeling very connected with everything. So I began to get curious about this notion of what we call in Buddhism, as you've taught me, the notion of dependent arising, the fact that everything is interdependent and changing.
So, can I hold you there for a second? So for you, the faith, since you were very young, you had this kind of like a feeling of wonderment of the world, and sort of sense of kind of like everything being wondrous and amazing. But you had also not only that kind of a sense, but some kind of a trust in that,
yes.
and some kind of a positive feeling with what's around you, or what's happening in your own life, or just like just observing the world from the child's view. And then as you grew older, you sort of like got more conceptual, or more sort of a conceptual minded, and then in there, then you kind of like what I'm hearing from you is that you have learned a lot of kind of concepts of what's good or what's bad, or what's right, what's wrong, and this is the way it is, and this is the way it isn't. And then that sort of like diminished that sort of sense of wonderment, or the wonderness and the amazement of the life itself and the world around you. And then that sort of like made you explore, the kind of like what that was, and how to kind of connect with that back again. Mm-hmm. And then the way you thought that, you can kind of like connect back with that is through the sort of like a practice, of course, but then maybe through also the reasoning. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, how to bring reasoning and that experience together. Mm-hmm. How could I understand things through my own discerning intelligence in a way that matched that kind of beautiful open experience? Because it seems strange there was this huge gap between reason and thinking and experience.
So is that aspect is the faith, and then now the reasoning is then when you sort of explore that with the practice and with the studies of the Buddha
yes.
Dharma, then you found the interdependent, or the pratyekshasam further as sort of like a means to kind of like really see, just as you experience as a child, that everything actually is a wondrous. Is
yes,
that what it is?
That's what happened.
Yeah.
That's what happened, because when you first introduced that to me, though it took me a while to understand what you were really saying, at some point I just became so curious about it, and it started to grip me, and I had to understand it. And it,
Can you tell more about what actually the Dandel, or the interdependent origination, or the in Sanskrit Pratyekshasam means actually?
Yes.
How's that? What does that mean, and what is that as to explore in the study and in the contemplations?
Yes, well, the Pratyekshasam was what the Buddha came to realize on the dawn of his awakening, and it means dependent arising. It's usually translated as dependent arising or dependent origination. And what it means basically is that everything leans, that there's nothing you can find that's not made of parts or dependent on other things that influence or interrupt it. It doesn't exist, nothing exists in a vacuum. It's all leans against other elements, and that's a way of speaking about the genesis of everything we experience. So the first teaching I ever had on Pratyekshasam was when we were sitting on a hill together in Nepal. We were very young, in our early 20s, and you said, "Lizzie, is this one or is this two?" And I didn't really understand why you're asking me that, or what it had to do with any kind of spiritual awakening. But I said that I thought, well, it's not one, because they're two things that are leaning. But you can't say they're two either, because they're creating one shape. And basically, I think you're pointing out the nature of reality to me by saying that everything that comes together is dependent. And it took me a long time and many years of study for that to start to take hold in the deepest way.
Can you say more about that? How did that happen, or what was the process of that?
Well, mostly I studied a lot of texts with you, like the 9th chapter of Shantideva, Bodhisattva Triavatara, the way of the Bodhisattva, or Chandrakirti, where we would spend a tremendous amount of time trying to find something that was independent, that existed intrinsically from its own side. When you look around in the world, we assume that there's the world, but there's no such thing as the world.
Yeah, isn't it amazing that
Yeah.
the assumption is that there is some kind of like autonomous thing, whether it's in regards to your own self or your own skandhas or anything else in the world, there is some kind of autonomous. But then if you really look into it, there is no one thing that is autonomous, and that's so amazing. Like our assumption is so much powerful than the reality, and the reality only can dawn on. Reality only can reveal itself and dawn on you when you investigate and when you really look deeply into and that's a really quite amazing. But anyway, how does that process affected you in your life and in your relation to the world and your relation to others?
This understanding, this very singular understanding of Pratityasamutpada has completely changed the way I see everything. One way I might describe it, and you used to say this all the time, and it took me a while to get it, but you used to say you begin to see that everything's magical. Like nothing is stuck in its place. So that nothing can really be ordinary because, for example, you look at a person, you think you know them. But that's a fixed concept. But in fact, everyone is changing and influenced by other things, and things are being interrupted and moving, and you can never really say what something is or how something is or what, and so you begin to see in a more nuanced way that nothing is really stuck, and you can never be right, which is very interesting because it really cuts through any sense of dogma or doubt or belief. So it does make the world magical, or it is already magical, but your thoughts loosen. Yes. Your fixed concepts loosen. So even with your own suffering, that starts to happen. Like you feel something arises and immediately you feel doomed, usually. But then with the practice and the analysis that comes with this practice, you begin to look more deeply into the nature of what's going on. And with a more nuanced way of looking, it opens up into a much different experience. And I think that's liberation, the liberation that comes through this practice.
Yes, it's kind of like it leaves you in a place of really kind of wonderment and the openness and this tender feeling
that's
of seeing things all how it's connected, and then not, literally. I mean, not just by preference, but not literally, with your own kind of innate wisdom, able to objectify anything, right?
Exactly. Objectify or reify. It doesn't allow that.
Yeah, it doesn't allow. And then that sort of like helps, I think it's amazing, that helps one's mind to be very lucid, and particularly it helps to promote the kind of positive aspect of the mind or the emotions, like interconnectedness and the love and the feeling of like a kindness and compassion, but then it sort of like it sort of remedies the kind of like objectification, reification, and then based on that like a judgment and grudge, and as well as anger, and so much of the all kind of the confused emotions to sort of like be also at the same time, without like directly aiming to them to be remedied, it sort of like naturally remedies them to sort of be much lessened or much sort of like not strong in one's mind, right? And that's like the great beauty of the practice in general, and it has to be kind of like the mind of the analysis and the kind of the experience of the analysis and the being who's analyzing, all three coming together in this state of very kind of amazement of the world and oneself and one's own mind, right? I think that's... So would you say that is the kind of like, have you found your way back to that amazement quality of the world and the faith in that, and that kind of a positive experience of what the life is all about?
Yeah, you see, you're getting at exactly what I was trying to do in this book, and that is that I absolutely did find a way to reconcile this kind of deeper experience that I have so much confidence in with this clarity of understanding of how the world is and what it means to be a human being, and also the training of being able to work with my own mind and my own confusions to open myself up out of my own misunderstandings about the way things are, so that I could actually access more and more this feeling of connectedness and what I have always thought of as faith.
Yeah, and it's also really, really amazing when you say that, I mean, Buddha was an enlightened supreme being walking on this earth 2,500 years ago, but this is the kind of his own exploration of life and mind that exploded, and as well as come to a sort of like a conclusion of what the sort of reality is, and what the sort of how to sit with the reality, and then Nagarjuna and many great masters up till this point. But then like someone like you who's actually born in the 21st century in the Western world, and also in the kind of Western culture, with all the flux that actually has happened in this last century after the two wars, that has happened, still can sort of like really do the same and make it very relevant, and make it a very sort of not only relevant but applicable to one's own life, and able to sort of communicate that to the others. I think that is the sort of the beauty, wouldn't you say, about the kind of the Buddha Dharma, and the sort of like the continuity of how even times have changed and cultures have changed, and so much actually there is sort of like a improvement in the modern world with the science and technology, but the aspect of the mind and the wisdom of the human is continuity. Would you say something about that?
Yeah, well, it's the nature of reality is the nature of reality. So when you look without the filters of conceptual, unexamined assumptions, which is really what this is. It's kind of like a first-person science. It's not a dogma or something to believe in, or something to believe or doubt or buy or not buy. It's just asking you to look, and it's showing you how to look. So when you look and you, see what you see, you have tremendous confidence in what you see because you've had a direct experience of it. So basically, I always think of the Buddha Dharma as a means. It's so powerful because it's really just asking you to hear the teachings, then contemplate, and then look for yourself through meditation. Yeah. And it provides guidance. But there's tremendous clarity to be had in that. And so it's not a dogma or a religion. It's really it's a invitation to really see the world in a very different and very magical way, but not a belief in it.
Yeah, way. It is really very amazing in that way, how actually great thinkers like Socrates, and how open-minded he was, and how he could actually, stay open-minded by the liberty of asking questions without conclusions, and also without any kind of preconceptions. How that is the kind of tradition of the Madhyamika and the tradition of the Buddha Dharma as well. And how that, to me, wouldn't you say, is a much more objective than sort of like having some kind of a cynicism of actually that whatever you come to sort of like pursue in your own analysis, that you cannot, conclude without some kind of like second guessing of it. And then the second guessing of it, and then the second guessing of it, so that then goes down like a rabbit hole, and it never gets to any kind of place of a conclusion.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate this, book, and I hope that this book really, makes people to also ask questions, and ask questions in a very objective way, but with the training of really, sharpening their own intellect, and also be able to sort of dissect everything, and then come to sort of like realize that there is no autonomous thing that we actually assume, and that we actually sort of come to, conclude, and then we emote, And I think this would be a really great contribution to the Dharma in the West in that way. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for writing this.
Yeah, thank you, Rinpoche. And if I could just say one more thing, this has been a great gift in my life, the great gift, really. And I've received that from you. And you've spent so much time, explaining this to me, and giving teachings to our community. we've studied all the great texts, and also you've explained it in such a fresh way that we as a new cult, we're new to this in this culture, can understand. And I hope that I can carry this out in a way that's beneficial.
Yes, you are. I think you're doing a really beautiful job in this way, to sort of like old wisdom with a new sort of like a medium to express its kind of entirety without sort of like any kind of like a watering down. And I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Rinpoche.
Thank you.